Howdy, folks. Our learning objective for today is to figure out what I mean by academic verbs. Specifically, I want you to identify the specific task that's associated with verbs and respond appropriately. So you make sure you are showing your teachers, not only me, that you know what they're talking about and that you're able to perform tasks well. So here's a list of them. Determine and identify, explain, describe, interpret, evaluate, analyze, support, and summarize. So really what we're working for is to find clarity, to understand what's the difference between explaining something and interpreting something. Or when I ask you to analyze something, how is that different from identifying something? So let's jump in. The first kind of two terms that are interchangeable is determine or identify. And what this really means is to figure something out or just make a decision. Tell me what you see. There's not a lot of opinion built into these two things. You're just kind of trying to find and state the facts. So you could determine one of the main claims in the author's arguments. So just figure that out, establish, decide, find what this author is doing here. Here's another example where you're determining how the author's heritage and culture sets her apart from her peers. You're not really analyzing it. You're not breaking it down. You're just saying, here it is. I've found, or I've established, or I've made a decision of here's how this affects this, or sets her apart. Next term is to explain or describe. And this is where we start getting into longer answers. Because if I'm asking you to explain something, I really want you to go to elaborate details, to really discuss, tell me a story, give me something to latch onto. So if a parent came in and said, hey, explain where you were last night because you were out until 2 a.m, and you said, I was with friends, that wouldn't really be a great explanation of where you were, right? You need to have piece by piece, detail by detail. Here's exactly what I was doing. Elaborate and clarify what we're talking about. So here's another good explanation for explain, is I need to explain the characteristics a student possesses when they can effectively learn on their own. So don't just state them, explain them. Tell me so I understand clearly what those characteristics are. No, this is not just a list. Next verb is interpret. This means for you to infer or translate. So tell me what you think it means, right? If you're interpreting things from English to Spanish, you're doing your best job of understanding, okay, here's what I think I need to be saying in Spanish. And there's usually a right or a wrong way. But a lot of times it's up to interpretation, right? You get to have kind of your say of here's how I see these things. It's your personal reaction with support. I'm going to add that in there. So if I ask you to interpret what the beach symbolizes in the poem, you can't just say the world. You've got to tell me why you think the beach symbolizes that in the poem. So here's a great example. Interpret the lines, but I have promises to keep and I have miles to go. So there's a lot of different interpretations to that. You just need to tell me what you think and why. Then we've got evaluate. And evaluate means that you are going to gauge. You are going to make an assessment of whatever it is we're talking about. So this gets to be your personal reaction, your judgment over something. So evaluate the effectiveness of an author's argument. You get to say this author did a great job or this author did a terrible job, and then you get to back that up with some support. So here's another example. You need to evaluate why success is more dependent on perseverance than IQ, right? You are telling me, you're making an evaluation. Why is this one better than this one? It usually has to do with kind of something is more, something is greater or less than another thing. Okay, let's press pause right here. I want you to, without looking at your notes, pause this video and then try to define the following verbs. What does it mean to identify, explain, interpret, or evaluate something? Give you guys a second there. All right, next one is to analyze. To analyze means to break down and deconstruct and examine. So I'm going to take something, I'm going to split it up all into its individual pieces and parts, and then I am going to analyze and examine each one of those parts to see how and why they fit together the way they do. A great example is my mom was a lab technician for a long time, and she would analyze blood. And literally what she would do is she would spin that blood in a centrifuge to split it apart into, here's how much red cells, how many red blood cells we have. Here's how many white blood cells we have. Here's the percentage of plasma. Here's the other stuff. And then they would give that to the doctors so they knew here's what we're working with. Here's the analysis of the blood. So you need to break it down, deconstruct these things, and then tell me what they mean. That's what analysis is. So analyze the ways in which the author's heritage influences her way of thinking. So that analyze almost always implies there's going to be more than one idea that you need to break apart, or to break an idea into more than one part. Support, one of our verbs, I'll often ask you to support your ideas. So it's not enough just to say, here's what I think. You have to tell me, here's what I think and why. So you've got to offer evidence and examples, details, data, anything to back up why you think what you do. That's really what we're working at here, is practicing that skill of having an idea, because your ideas are valid and justifiable, and they're worth something. We should hear them, but we should also hear why you think what you do. And then lastly, hopefully we're pretty familiarized with this one. This is just summarize. It's to kind of paraphrase, to parse down, to tell me what's the most important things of a concept, of an article, of a poem, of a picture. So it's an abbreviation of something. So summarize the author's support for their thesis. So you would need to tell me, how does this author or this article back up this idea? So I've got a couple of verb battles. So what do I mean to identify versus explain? Give you guys a second to think about that. What's the difference between identification or an explanation? See if you can jot that down in your notes. Next one is, what's the difference between explanation and analysis? And then last one, what does it mean to interpret versus what does it mean to evaluate? See if you can come up with a description or definition, delineation between those two. All right, we do have some verb practice that I'm going to have you work on. So good luck with that. Make sure you refer back to these notes and you are doing your best to use these verbs and address these verbs if I ask you to analyze or evaluate or interpret. Good luck, folks.